I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Karen Whitmore standing on my front lawn at 7 in the morning with an extension cord in her hand, and that familiar expression of entitled determination on her face. My name is Aaron Ingram, and I had moved into the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, exactly 6 months prior. The house was perfect. A 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a beautifully landscaped front yard featuring native desert plants and a couple of saguaro cacti that had been there for probably 50 years. The neighborhood itself seemed quiet and peaceful when I first toured it, which was exactly what I needed after years of living in a cramped apartment near downtown Phoenix, where the noise never stopped. What the real estate agent conveniently failed to mention was that Meadowbrook Hills had one of the most aggressive homeowners associations in the entire state, and that Karen Whitmore, a 52-year-old woman with a blonde bob haircut and an attitude that could curdle milk, served as the HOA president with an iron fist. I was standing in my kitchen that morning, still in my pajama pants and a faded Arizona State University t-shirt, pouring my first cup of coffee when I noticed movement through the window. At first, I thought maybe it was a landscaper or someone doing yard work, but then I recognized the bright purple tracksuit that Karen seemed to wear at least 3 times a week. She was crouched down near the front corner of my house, fiddling with something near the outdoor electrical outlet I had installed just 2 months earlier. The outlet had been a necessary addition. I worked from home as a software developer for a tech company based in California, and sometimes I liked to set up my laptop on the front porch in the early morning when the Arizona heat was still manageable. Plus, I enjoyed doing projects in the garage and needed convenient access to power for my tools without running extension cords through the house. I had hired a licensed electrician to install it properly, pulled all the necessary permits with the city of Scottsdale, and made sure everything was up to code. The outlet was positioned on the front exterior wall of my house, about 3 feet from the ground, covered with a weatherproof box that matched the stucco color of my home. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter and walked quickly to my front door, opening it just as Karen was plugging something into my outlet. She had brought what looked like a massive commercial-grade extension cord, the thick orange kind that contractors use, and was running it across my lawn toward her own property 2 houses down. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping onto my porch. "What are you doing?" Karen looked up at me with an expression that suggested I was the one being unreasonable by questioning her actions. "Oh, Aaron, good morning. I am just borrowing your outlet for a little while. We are having our annual HOA community garage sale this weekend, and I need to set up some lights and a sound system in the common area. My outdoor outlets are not working properly, so I figured I would just use yours since you are right here." I walked down the steps of my porch, feeling the warmth of the concrete through my bare feet. The morning sun was already bright, promising another scorching day. "You cannot just use my electricity without asking first. That outlet is on my property, and I pay for the power that runs through it." Karen stood up, brushing dirt off her knees with quick, irritated movements. "It is just for the weekend, Aaron. Do not be so selfish. This is for the community. The garage sale benefits everyone in the neighborhood. We use the proceeds for landscaping improvements and community events." "That is great, but it does not give you the right to use my electricity without permission," I said, keeping my voice level despite the frustration building in my chest. "You need to unplug that right now." Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the shift in her demeanor from fake friendly to openly hostile. "I am the HOA president, Aaron. I have certain authorities when it comes to community needs. If you had come to more meetings, you would understand how things work around here. I had attended exactly 2 HOA meetings since moving in, and both had been insufferable experiences. The first meeting had been 3 hours of Karen and her board members arguing about the acceptable shade of beige for exterior house paint. The second meeting had devolved into a heated debate about whether residents should be allowed to park their cars on the street overnight, with Karen insisting that all vehicles must be garaged to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal. I had stopped going after that. "I do not care what your title is," I said firmly. "That outlet is on my private property and you are stealing my electricity. Unplug it now, or I will unplug it myself." Karen's face flushed red, clashing with her purple tracksuit. "How dare you accuse me of stealing? I am trying to do something nice for this community, and you are being completely uncooperative. This is exactly the kind of attitude that makes neighborhoods fall apart. I am going to make note of this in your HOA file." "My HOA file," I almost laughed. "Make whatever notes you want. Just unplug your extension cord from my outlet." She crossed her arms over her chest, standing her ground. "No, I need this for the garage sale. You are being ridiculous and antisocial. What is a few dollars of electricity over one weekend? You can afford it." "That is not the point," I said, my patience wearing thin. "The point is that you did not ask and you do not have permission. This is theft of services, and if you do not unplug it right now, I am going to report you." Karen let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Report me to who? I run this HOA. I decide what gets reported and what does not. You are new here, so let me explain how things work. We look out for each other in this community, we share resources when needed, and we do not act like petty, selfish individuals who cannot spare a little electricity for the greater good." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Karen, I am asking you one more time. Please unplug your extension cord from my outlet." "And I am telling you no," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a lot of work to do to set up for the garage sale. Feel free to stop by on Saturday if you would like to donate any items or actually participate in this community for once." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, leaving the bright orange extension cord stretched across my front lawn like some kind of ridiculous umbilical cord connecting our properties. I stood there for a moment, genuinely shocked by her audacity. In all my years of renting and now owning property, I had never encountered someone so brazenly entitled. I walked over to the outlet and unplugged her extension cord, wrapping it up and setting it on the edge of my lawn. Then I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and started doing research. If Karen thought she could just steal my electricity and hide behind her HOA title, she was about to learn otherwise. A quick search revealed that utility theft in Arizona was indeed a crime, covered under Arizona Revised Statutes Title 13. Stealing utility services could result in both criminal charges and civil penalties, depending on the amount stolen and the circumstances. I also discovered that the local utility company, Arizona Public Service, took utility theft very seriously and had a dedicated department for investigating such cases. I called APS first, explaining the situation to a customer service representative who connected me with their theft investigation unit. The investigator, a man named Robert Chen, listened carefully to my story and asked several questions about the outlet when I noticed the theft, and whether I had any evidence. "You have any security cameras that might have captured her plugging in?" Robert asked. "I do, actually," I said, remembering the Ring doorbell camera I had installed shortly after moving in, plus the 2 additional security cameras I had mounted on the corners of my house. I should have video of the whole thing. Perfect, Robert said. If you can send that footage to me, along with a written statement, we will open an investigation. Utility theft is a serious matter, and it does not matter if she is the HOA president or not. Nobody has the right to steal electricity from your property. After I hung up with APS, I called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line and filed a report there as well. The officer who took my statement was polite and thorough, explaining that while this might seem like a minor issue, property rights were important, and theft of services was indeed a prosecutable offense. We will send an officer out to take an official report, the dispatcher said. Someone should be there within the next 2 hours. I spent the next hour reviewing my security camera footage and downloading the relevant clips. The video clearly showed Karen walking onto my property with the extension cord, plugging it into my outlet without permission, and then running the cord across my lawn. It also captured our entire conversation, including her refusal to unplug when I asked her to do so. The audio was crystal clear. Officer Daniel Martinez arrived at 9:30, a tall man in his mid-30s with a professional demeanor. He took down all the details, watched the security footage on his tablet after I emailed it to him, and photographed the outlet and the extension cord that was still lying on my lawn where I had left it. "You did the right thing by calling us," Officer Martinez said as he completed his report. "A lot of people would just let something like this slide, but it sets a bad precedent. If she is willing to steal your electricity now, what else might she feel entitled to do later?" "That is exactly my concern," I said. "I have heard stories about this HOA from some of the other residents. Apparently, Karen has a history of overstepping boundaries." Officer Martinez nodded. "HOA disputes are pretty common in this area. We get calls about them all the time. But this goes beyond a typical HOA issue because she is actually stealing from you. I am going to go talk to her now and get her side of the story. I will let you know what happens." I watched from my front window as Officer Martinez walked down the street to Karen's house. A large 2-story Mediterranean-style home with an immaculately maintained yard full of rose bushes and ornamental grasses. Even from a distance, I could see Karen's shock when she opened the door and saw a police officer standing on her porch. The conversation lasted about 15 minutes. I could not hear what was being said, but I could see Karen's animated gestures and the way she kept pointing in the direction of my house. Officer Martinez remained calm and professional, taking notes and occasionally asking questions. Finally, he handed her what looked like a citation and returned to my house. "She is pretty upset," Officer Martinez said with a slight smile. "She tried to tell me that as HOA president, she has the authority to use common resources for community events. I explained to her that your electrical outlet is not a common resource. It is your private property, and she committed theft of services. I have issued her a citation, and she will need to either pay the fine or appear in court to contest it." "What is the fine?" I asked, curious. "For a first-time offense of this nature, it is typically between $200 and $500, plus any court costs if she chooses to fight it," Officer Martinez explained. "The judge will make the final determination based on the circumstances." I also warned her that if she attempts to use your outlet again without permission, she could face more serious charges. I thanked Officer Martinez for his help, and he left with a reminder to contact them immediately if Karen retaliated or caused any further problems. As I watched his patrol car drive away, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. On one hand, I had stood up for my rights and refused to be bullied by an overbearing HOA president. On the other hand, I had just made an enemy of someone who wielded considerable power in the neighborhood. I did not have to wait long for the fallout to begin. 3 days later, I found a letter from the HOA in my mailbox. It was printed on official Meadowbrook Hills letterhead and signed by Karen Whitmore in her capacity as HOA president. The letter informed me that I was in violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which stated that all exterior modifications to properties must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation. According to the letter, my outdoor electrical outlet constituted an exterior modification that had never been approved, and I was being fined $500. Additionally, I had 30 days to remove the outlet or face daily fines of $50 until compliance was achieved. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter 3 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. The audacity was breathtaking. Karen was clearly retaliating against me for reporting her to the police, and she was using her position in the HOA to do it. I pulled out the massive binder of HOA documents that I had received when I closed on the house, something I had barely glanced at during the whirlwind of moving. After an hour of reading through dense legal language and archaic rules, I found Section 7, Paragraph 3. It did indeed state that exterior modifications required approval, but it also included a list of exceptions. Items that were considered routine maintenance or minor improvements that did not require committee review. The list included things like repainting in approved colors, replacing broken fixtures, and installing exterior electrical outlets for household use. My outlet fell squarely within the exceptions. It was a standard residential outlet, properly permitted with the city, and installed by a licensed electrician. According to the HOA's own rules, I did not need approval for it. I immediately drafted a response letter, citing the specific exception in the HOA rules and including copies of the city permit and the electrician's certification of work. I also pointed out that the timing of this violation notice, coming just 3 days after I had filed a police report against the HOA president, appeared to be retaliatory in nature. I sent the letter via certified mail to the HOA's official address and kept copies of everything for my records. The following week, I received another letter. This one informed me that the Architectural Review Committee had reviewed my appeal and determined that my interpretation of the exceptions was incorrect. The outdoor outlet did require approval. My appeal was denied, and I now had 23 days remaining to remove the outlet before daily fines would begin. I could not believe what I was reading. The rules were black and white, clearly stating that my outlet was an exception. There was no gray area here, no room for interpretation. Karen was simply abusing her power. I decided it was time to consult with a lawyer. After asking around and doing some online research, I found an attorney named David Brennan who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in Old Town Scottsdale, in a historic building that had been converted into professional suites. David was in his early 50s, with graying hair and the calm, confident demeanor of someone who had seen every trick in the book. HOA retaliation cases are more common than you might think, David said after I explained my situation. He was sitting behind his desk, reviewing the documents I had brought. The problem is that HOA boards often operate with very little oversight, and when someone like your HOA president has a vendetta, they can make life very difficult for a homeowner. So what can I do? I asked. Several things, David said, leaning back in his chair. First, we need to send a formal demand letter to the HOA, clearly outlining that your outlet falls within the exceptions clause, and that their attempt to fine you is both baseless and retaliatory. We will cite the relevant sections of their own rules and give them 10 days to withdraw the fines and violation notice. Second, we need to document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every conversation. If this escalates to litigation, we want a clear paper trail. Third, you should consider filing a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. The Department of Real Estate handles HOAs, I asked, surprised. They do, David confirmed. In Arizona, HOAs are regulated to some degree by the state. If an HOA or its board members are engaging in harassment, discrimination, or abuse of power, homeowners can file complaints. It does not always result in immediate action, but it creates an official record and sometimes prompts an investigation. I left David's office feeling more empowered. I was not just some helpless homeowner at the mercy of a petty tyrant. I had rights, and there were legal mechanisms to protect those rights. David sent the demand letter to the HOA the following day. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, polite but firm, clearly laying out the facts and the law while warning of potential legal action if the HOA did not comply. We sent copies to Karen personally, to the HOA's registered agent, and to all members of the HOA board. The response came not from Karen, but from the HOA's attorney, a man named Gregory Fuller. His letter was equally polite but maintained that the HOA's position was correct. According to Fuller, the Architectural Review Committee had the discretion to determine what did and did not fall within the exceptions clause, and they had determined that my outlet required approval. The fines would stand. "This is ridiculous," I told David during our phone call after I received Fuller's letter. "They are just making stuff up now. The rules are clear." "I agree," David said, "which is why we are going to file a lawsuit. We will sue the HOA for declaratory relief, asking the court to rule that your outlet falls within the exceptions and that the fines are invalid. We will also include claims for harassment and abuse of power, and we will seek attorneys' fees and costs." In Arizona, if an HOA loses a case and the court finds they acted unreasonably, they can be ordered to pay the homeowner's legal fees. The lawsuit was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court 2 weeks later. The complaint was detailed and thorough, laying out the timeline of events, the clear language of the HOA rules, and the evidence of retaliation. We also included the police report from Karen's utility theft and the citation she had received, showing a pattern of behavior where she felt entitled to disregard rules and boundaries. Word of the lawsuit spread through the neighborhood quickly. I started receiving emails and text messages from other residents, some supportive and others critical. A man named Tom, who lived 3 streets over, stopped by my house one evening with a 6-pack of beer. "I just wanted to say good for you," Tom said as we sat on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Karen has been a nightmare for years. She fined me last year because she said my palm tree was 2 inches too tall according to some obscure rule nobody had ever heard of before. I ended up paying the fine because I could not afford to fight it, but it has bothered me ever since." "How does she stay in power if everyone seems to dislike her?" I asked. Tom shrugged. "Most people do not want to deal with the hassle of HOA politics. The elections are a joke because barely anyone shows up to vote. Karen and her little group of friends just keep electing each other to the board. Plus, she is retired and has nothing but time on her hands, so she can dedicate hours every day to HOA stuff. Most of us are working and raising families. We do not have that kind of time." Someone needs to run against her, I said. You should do it, Tom suggested. The next election is in 4 months. You would have my vote. I had not considered running for the HOA board, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. If I won, I could work to change the culture of the HOA from within, make it less about petty rule enforcement and more about actually serving the community. Meanwhile, the legal process was moving forward. The HOA filed their response to my lawsuit, essentially arguing that they had broad discretion to interpret their own rules and that courts should not interfere with HOA governance. David filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the facts were undisputed and the law was clear, so there was no need for a trial. A hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. During this time, Karen seemed to go out of her way to make my life difficult. I received violation notices for the most absurd things. One letter claimed my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after trash pickup, which apparently violated some rule about maintaining curb appeal. Another letter said my front lawn had several brown patches that needed to be repaired within 14 days. A third letter complained that I had parked my car in my driveway instead of my garage, and driveways were only for temporary parking, not vehicle storage. Each violation notice came with a fine, ranging from $100 to $300. I documented everything and forwarded it all to David, who was building a file that clearly demonstrated a pattern of harassment. "This is actually good for our case," David said during one of our weekly phone calls. "She is being so obvious about the retaliation that it strengthens our position. A judge is going to look at this timeline and see exactly what is happening." The hearing for summary judgment took place on a Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix. The courthouse was an imposing building with high ceilings and marble floors. David and I arrived early, going over our arguments one last time. Gregory Fuller appeared on behalf of the HOA, along with Karen herself, who glared at me from across the hallway. The judge assigned to our case was the Honorable Patricia Simmons, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had clearly read all the briefs and came prepared with questions. "Mr. Brennan," Judge Simmons began, addressing my attorney, "your client installed an exterior electrical outlet without seeking HOA approval. The HOA rules do require approval for exterior modifications." "Why should I rule in your client's favor?" David stood confidently. "Your Honor, the HOA rules also include a specific list of exceptions for minor modifications that do not require approval. Exterior electrical outlets for household use are explicitly listed as an exception. My client's outlet falls squarely within that exception. Additionally, the outlet was properly permitted with the City of Scottsdale and installed by a licensed electrician. It meets all code requirements." Judge Simmons turned to Gregory Fuller. "Mr. Fuller, how do you respond to that?" "The exceptions clause seems fairly clear." Fuller cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the Architectural Review Committee has the discretion to determine what falls within the exceptions. In this case, they determined that Mr. Ingram's outlet did not qualify because of its placement on the front exterior of the house, which is more visible to the community than an outlet placed on a side or rear wall. Is there anything in the HOA rules that distinguishes between front, side, or rear placement for electrical outlets?" Judge Simmons asked, flipping through the documents in front of her. "Not specifically, Your Honor, but the committee has the authority to make such determinations," Fuller said. Judge Simmons did not look convinced. "It seems to me that if the HOA wanted to distinguish between different placements, they should have included that in their rules. I am also troubled by the timeline here." Mr. Ingram's outlet was installed several months ago, but he only received a violation notice 3 days after filing a police report against the HOA president. That looks like retaliation to me. Your Honor, that is pure speculation, Fuller protested. The HOA only became aware of the outlet when Mrs. Whitmore was on Mr. Ingram's property for community purposes. Community purposes? Judge Simmons raised an eyebrow. According to the police report, Mrs. Whitmore was attempting to use Mr. Ingram's electricity without permission, which resulted in a citation for utility theft. I fail to see how that constitutes community purposes. Karen, sitting behind her attorney, looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Judge Simmons continued. I am going to grant summary judgment in favor of Mr. Ingram. The outlet clearly falls within the exceptions clause of the HOA rules, and the attempt to fine him for it appears to be retaliatory. The HOA is ordered to withdraw all fines and violation notices related to the electrical outlet immediately. She paused, looking at a stack of papers. I also see that Mr. Ingram has documented numerous other violation notices issued since this dispute began. I am concerned about a pattern of harassment here. David spoke up. Your Honor, we would like to request a protective order preventing the HOA from issuing any further violation notices to my client unless they can demonstrate a legitimate, good faith basis for such notices. Judge Simmons nodded. I think that is appropriate under these circumstances. The HOA is ordered not to issue any violation notices to Mr. Ingram for the next 6 months, unless they can first provide documentation to this court showing a clear and legitimate violation of HOA rules. Any violation notices issued during this period without court approval will be considered void. Additionally, the HOA will pay Mr. Ingram's attorney's fees and costs. Mr. Brennan, please submit a fee statement within 14 days. The hearing was over in less than 30 minutes. As we walked out of the courtroom, I felt a surge of relief and vindication. Karen rushed past us without making eye contact, her face red with anger and embarrassment. That went very well, David said as we stood in the courthouse plaza. Judge Simmons clearly saw through the HOA's tactics. The protective order is particularly important because it prevents them from continuing to harass you. What happens now? I asked. They will have to pay your attorney's fees, which will probably total around $8,000 by the time I submit my final statement, David explained. They also have to withdraw all the fines, and Karen's credibility as HOA president has taken a serious hit. I would not be surprised if some residents start questioning her leadership. David was right about that. Within days of the court order becoming public record, I started receiving more messages from neighbors, many expressing frustration with how the HOA had been run and asking if I was serious about running for the board in the upcoming election. A group of residents even organized a meeting at a local coffee shop to discuss HOA reform. I attended the meeting along with about 15 other homeowners. Tom was there, along with a woman named Susan Martinez who lived at the end of my street, a younger couple named Brad and Jennifer Thompson, and several others I recognized from the neighborhood but had never formally met. We need to take back control of this HOA, Susan said passionately. She was a family law attorney and had strong opinions about governance and accountability. Karen has been running this neighborhood like her personal fiefdom for too long. We need board members who actually care about the community, not about power trips. Aaron, you should definitely run for president, Brad said. You have proven that you are willing to stand up to Karen and you won in court. People respect that. I agreed to run, and several others also volunteered to run for the other board positions. We spent the next several weeks campaigning. which in HOA terms meant sending emails, posting in the neighborhood Facebook group, and going door to door to talk to residents. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were tired of the constant fines, the arbitrary rule enforcement, and the general atmosphere of fear that Karen had created. Karen, meanwhile, was dealing with consequences beyond the HOA. The citation she had received from Scottsdale police for utility theft was not something that just went away. She tried to fight it in court, arguing that she had only been trying to help the community and that it was all a misunderstanding. The prosecutor was not sympathetic. Utility theft was taken seriously, especially when the defendant refused to stop when asked by the property owner. I actually attended Karen's court hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom to watch. She showed up with Gregory Fuller, who was apparently representing her personally now. The hearing was brief. The judge reviewed the evidence, including the video footage from my security cameras, and found Karen guilty of theft of services. The fine was $450, plus court costs, bringing her total to nearly $600. The judge also ordered her to complete 20 hours of community service and placed her on 6 months of probation. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said sternly, "being an HOA president does not give you the right to take property or services from others without permission. In fact, as a community leader, you should be held to a higher standard. I hope you use your community service hours to reflect on appropriate behavior and boundaries." Karen's face was pale as she nodded and accepted the judgment. I left the courthouse feeling that justice had been served, though I took no particular pleasure in her humiliation. I had never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live peacefully in my house without someone else telling me what I could and could not do with my own property. The HOA election took place on a Saturday in late September. Voting was conducted in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that hosted occasional events and meetings. The turnout was the highest anyone could remember, with over 60% of households sending representatives to vote. When the results were announced that evening, I had won the presidency by a landslide. Tom was elected vice president, Susan became treasurer, and 2 other reform-minded candidates won the remaining board seats. Karen had chosen to run for re-election, but received only about 20% of the vote. She left the clubhouse quickly after the results were announced, not bothering to attend the brief celebration that followed. My first act as HOA president was to call a board meeting to review all outstanding violation notices and fines. We went through dozens of cases where residents had been fined for minor, often ridiculous violations. We voted to rescind most of them and establish clearer, more reasonable guidelines for future enforcement. We also implemented a new policy requiring that all violation notices be approved by a majority of the board before being sent to residents, preventing any single person from wielding that power arbitrarily. We reformed the Architectural Review Committee, establishing transparent criteria for what required approval and what did not. We created an online portal where residents could easily submit applications and check the status of their requests. We also organized social events, barbecues, and movie nights at the clubhouse to build actual community rather than just enforcing rules. The transformation was not overnight, but within a few months, the atmosphere in Meadowbrook Hills had changed dramatically. People actually talked to each other again. Neighbors helped neighbors, and the HOA became something positive rather than something to fear. Karen largely disappeared from neighborhood life. She still lived in her house but kept to herself, avoiding community events and interactions with other residents. I occasionally saw her driving past my house, and sometimes she would glance at the outdoor electrical outlet that had started this whole saga, but we never spoke. About a year after everything had happened, I was working on my front porch one morning when a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. I watched over the next several hours as movers loaded furniture and boxes. Karen supervised the process, barking instructions at the movers with the same authoritative tone she had once used as HOA president. Tom walked over to my porch, holding a cup of coffee. "Looks like she is finally leaving," he said. "Good riddance," I said, though I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy but perhaps acknowledgment that things had not turned out well for her. "I heard she is moving to a regular subdivision without an HOA," Tom said with a slight smile. "Apparently she has had enough of homeowner associations." I could not help but laugh at the irony. A few weeks after Karen moved out, I received a letter in the mail. It was from her, forwarded from her new address somewhere in Tucson. The letter was short and typed formally. "Mr. Ingram," it read, "I am writing to acknowledge that my actions regarding your electrical outlet were inappropriate. I should not have used your property without permission, and I should not have retaliated against you through HOA enforcement when you reported me. My time as HOA president taught me that power can corrupt even well-intentioned people, and I lost sight of what community leadership should be about. I hope that under your leadership, Meadowbrook Hills becomes the kind of neighborhood it deserves to be. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore." I read the letter several times, surprised by its candor. It was not exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgment, which was perhaps more valuable. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, a small piece of closure to a strange and stressful chapter of my life. Running the HOA turned out to be more work than I had anticipated, but it was also rewarding. I learned a lot about property law, community governance, and human nature. I learned that most disputes could be resolved through communication and compromise rather than threats and fines. I learned that people generally wanted the same things: safe neighborhoods, friendly communities, and the freedom to enjoy their homes without unreasonable interference. The outdoor electrical outlet, the small piece of infrastructure that had caused so much trouble, remained exactly where it was. I used it regularly for my laptop, my power tools, and occasionally to plug in holiday lights during the winter season. Every time I plugged something in, I thought about the bizarre series of events that had unfolded because one person thought she had the right to help herself to something that was not hers. Years passed, and life in Meadowbrook Hills continued peacefully. I eventually stepped down as HOA president after serving 2 terms, satisfied that I had helped create a better culture and more sensible policies. New residents moved in, unaware of the dramatic conflicts that had once plagued the neighborhood. The HOA became what it should have always been: a small administrative body focused on maintaining common areas and resolving legitimate disputes, not a weapon for petty tyrants to wield against their neighbors. I sometimes told the story of Karen and the electrical outlet to friends over beers, and it always got laughs. The absurdity of it, the escalation from such a minor incident to lawsuits and elections, seemed almost unbelievable. But anyone who had ever dealt with an overbearing HOA understood exactly how such things could happen. The electrical outlet itself eventually needed to be replaced after about 5 years when the weatherproof cover cracked during a particularly intense monsoon storm. I hired the same electrician who had installed it originally, and this time, nobody questioned my right to have it. Nobody tried to fine me, and nobody attempted to steal electricity from it. It was just a normal home improvement project, the way things should have always been. Looking back, I realized that the entire experience had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of knowing your rights, and about the dangers of unchecked authority, even in something as seemingly mundane as a homeowner association. It also taught me that communities thrive when people treat each other with respect and fairness, not when they try to control and intimidate one another. My house in Meadowbrook Hills remained my home, a place I loved and felt comfortable. The neighborhood became a real community, the kind of place where people looked out for each other not because an HOA rule required it, but because that is what good neighbors do. Children played in the streets without fear that their parents would be fined for leaving a bicycle on the lawn overnight. Residents painted their front doors in colors they liked, planted gardens full of flowers they chose, and generally enjoyed the freedom to make their houses into homes. The outdoor electrical outlet, weathered by sun and rain but still perfectly functional after its replacement, remained a quiet symbol of a battle won and a principle defended. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest things matter the most, not because of their inherent importance, but because of what they represent. In this case, it represented property rights, personal boundaries, and the fundamental principle that nobody, regardless of their title or position, has the right to take what belongs to someone else without permission. And somewhere in Tucson, I hoped that Karen Whitmore had found peace in her non-HOA neighborhood, free from the responsibilities and temptations of power, able to simply be a neighbor rather than a ruler. Whether she had learned anything from the experience, I would never know, but I like to think that everyone was capable of growth and change, even those who seemed most set in their ways. The sun set over the Arizona desert each evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and I often sat on my front porch, laptop plugged into that infamous outdoor electrical outlet, grateful for the peaceful life I had fought to protect and the community I had helped to build. It was not the quiet, easy existence I had imagined when I first moved to Meadowbrook Hills, but it was something better. A home earned through principle and defended through perseverance, in a neighborhood that had transformed from a battlefield into a genuine community where people could live freely and happily together.